And I would suggest, since it's the shorter item, to go over it and sort of get it out of the way for the longer item that we do. Items number 3, 4, and 5 first on the library. So if we could have the library folks come up and make a presentation, that would be great.
Do you want the controller staff to come up?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll just read the item for the record. Item number 3 is the City Controller Report relative to a performance audit of the Los Angeles Public Library 2007-2010 Strategic Plan. Item number 4 is another City Controller Report relative to a performance audit of patron access to the Los Angeles Public Library's books and materials. And item number 5 is a motion by Council Members Weezer and Labange relative to requesting the Library Department to report on the recommendations identified in a Controller Report entitled Performance Audit of Public Access to the Library's Books and Materials and Related Matters. On August 5, 2009, the Arts, Parks, Health, and Aging Committee approved the motion.
Okay, and if we could have the City Controller's Office make a presentation first, and then the library staff.
Okay. The first audit that we issued on June 10th, 2009 was a performance audit of the Los Angeles Public Library's 2007-2010 strategic plan. And I apologize, I'm Cynthia Varela with the Controller's Office. I didn't introduce myself. As you know, strategic planning is utilized by well-administered organizations to ensure the entity's core mission and goals and objectives are efficiently and effectively carried out. Comprehensive planning strategies enable organizations to meet the identified needs of customers or clients, in this case, the library being able to meet the needs of its patrons. Strategic planning is not new for the library. The library developed a master's facilities plan in 1988 to build or renovate 64 branch library facilities and develop a technology infrastructure. They successfully completed the building plan on time and under budget and were able to build 6 additional facilities. The next step that they did was then develop a strategic plan, which is what we conducted our audit on. Our audit objective was to perform an independent assessment of the library's performance measures and indicators, specifically to conduct an overall assessment of performance management processes to ensure relevant, reliable, and accurate data are collected, enabling management to improve results in an effective manner. The second objective, determine the relevance of the performance measures to the activities being measured and ensure alignment with the library's mission, and assess the progress in meeting goals by verifying achievements. Our overall conclusion was that we found a very comprehensive strategic plan, one that is very ambitious and aligned with the department's core mission. As a result, we only identified 3 primary audit issues and had 9 related recommendations. We found there were a few areas where improvements could be made. These include what we noted is that there was no formalized process for measuring performance against objectives. Many of the data collected were not reliable as they lacked supporting documentation to verify accuracy. In some cases, it was because the source documentation was not retained by the library. And lastly, that the plan should be periodically reassessed for current priorities and available resources. We wanted them to reassess and look for overlapping objectives and make sure that they were clearly defined. The department provided action plans for recommendations on June 30th. The plans that we reviewed were acceptable, and they would address the recommendations. We had requested timeframes for implementation, which the department recently provided, and we're still reviewing those.
Thank you. If you could make your presentation as well.
In auditing the library strategic plan, the Controller's Office developed their 8 recommendations, and we support all 8 recommendations, and we hope to implement all of them by early 2010 on the strategic plan. And did you talk about the books also?
No, I kind of did them separate.
So we're glad that the Controller commended the library for our efforts in developing a comprehensive strategic plan.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a few questions. I know the information system has been updated. How will this improve the department's operations, and how will this help address some of the audit recommendations?
Actually, we're going to do the upgrade next week, this coming weekend, And that will help us strengthen all of our reporting requirements and give us a better handle. I don't know. I have Steve Newcomer, our head of our IT, if you want to comment. Sorry. Make it more specific.
Steve Newcomer. We are upgrading our primary library automation software this weekend, and as a result, we hope that there will be greater flexibility in creating reports such as those that auditors have requested.
Let me ask, what does that software entail? Is that monitoring books? Is it
Right.
software?
It's the library's primary integrated library system software, so it covers everything we do, from checking out books to maintaining patron records to catalog, our online catalog, our acquisition system. It's really our core library software.
And since you mentioned that piece of it, does this affect our collections and tracking fines and such? And I don't know how much of a problem that's been in the past because I'm still relatively new. How has the library system done previously in terms of collecting fines, et cetera?
Actually, we've done very well, and just recently, a year and a half ago, patrons can now pay their fines over the web, and so we've been able to even increase our collections.
In addition, we have a a materials recovery agency that pursues overdue fines after we are unable to find them, to retrieve them. The collection agency takes over and pursues the overdue fines.
And in terms of our bad budget situation, have we looked recently at our fine structure, and are there other things that we're looking at to try to have the library system help generate additional revenue towards its own operations?
Well, we've increased our fines twice in the last 2 years, and we're probably, of the library systems in Southern California, we charge the most. We're public service oriented, and we're not a revenue generating department. So we're always looking for ways to increase revenues, but the premise is that we provide a lot of things free to the public. They borrow books for free, they get a lot of our resources for free. So they use our computers for free. But we are exploring, options and ideas, and we'll continue to do that during this terrible budgetary time.
I mean, can you share with us any of those ideas that have been looked at?
Well, I think ITA is exploring generating advertising revenue on our computers. So that's an option we're exploring.
And how about the Library Foundation? How is that doing in terms of helping us? And have we looked at other models of foundations like the Police Foundation, which has been very successful in contributing funding?
The Library Foundation of Los Angeles is probably the second most successful library foundation, second to New York. They incorporated in 1992, and to date they've probably raised about $60 million over the last 17 years for the library systems, but they raise for specific programs. They don't supplant city dollars. They're not going to raise books for, books that they think the city should provide for. They raise money for, adult literacy programs, our live homework help program where we have free online tutoring. They've supporting our college prep program where we provide college preparatory testings, free programs for the public. So they provide those programs. They don't. It's not bread and butter. But they've been very helpful. But like with everybody, like with this economy, their donations are down also. So.
And I have one other question, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues for their questions. The controller identified some areas of weakness. One was the fact that the library system has goals, but it didn't really have a good process to follow up on whether those goals had been achieved and really to assess them. Have we moved in that direction since
We've
audit?
certainly tightened up our process, and one of the recommendations was to have more formal follow-up on the process, and we're doing that. In the next couple of months, we're going to report to our library commission and provide them a formal status report on where we are in our strategic plan. So we are tightening up our procedures and our goal setting. And the goals, we hired a consultant that does strategic plans for other library systems, and they did lots of goals and objectives and activities, and that's how strategic planning is in the library industry. So we are already starting developing a new strategic plan for the next period, so I'm sure we'll improve with that strategic plan.
But before that, you are tightening up
Right.
on actual assessment of those goals rather than just
And
laying them
weekly,
out.
Statistics, make sure the statistics that we're conducting are more aligned with the strategic plan. So we are tightening up our
Great.
record taking.
Other questions? Councilmember Parks?
One thing, when you mentioned the home tutoring program, that's one of your outstanding services, but what we find is that a good number of people in the community aren't aware of it. And I'm just wondering whether we've highlighted it at the schools or how we've gone about making people aware of that.
Our librarians go and visit all the schools in the LAUSD and private schools, and we try to leave flyers. We talk to the classes to tell students that we have this free online tutoring program. Unfortunately, we don't have an advertising budget or a promotion budget, so we can't tell the world or we can't advertise on television that we have this. We have done programs on Channel 35, and they've done programs about the library services, but you're right, not everybody knows that we have this wonderful free online tutoring program.
I'm just wondering, with what we've done, is any tie-in with LA Unified School District? Or is that part of the local librarians' role, is to have contact with the schools?
We've tried both. The local librarians do have contact with the local schools, and we've also have, go through it at the district level or at the centralized level where we put it in the teachers' bulletins to let them know that we have these services.
Okay. The one thing, and I thought we'd already done it, but we were going to put together a motion to ask to look at whether technology, in the sense of, when we look at some of the electronic books and some of the systems that are in place with Amazon and Kindle, whether there's an ability for the library to move in that direction, having books online where people can access them. There's no need to come pick them up. We don't have to buy that number of copies. And so that's something that we're moving forward on, to see how that basically can assist us in the future, that we can cut down on buying supplies but still have access. And I don't know whether it matches with the libraries in general, but in just looking at some of the technology on books and magazines and things like that, it seems there is a growing effort on electronic access electronically to books and magazines.
Yes, there definitely is, and the Los Angeles Public Library takes pride in being one of the leaders in the country in this regard. We have over 9,000 ebooks now that you can either read online or download to your own device. In addition, we have downloadable music and videos. So it's definitely the trend, and you are absolutely right. It's a more economical way to go when it's feasible. Not all books, of course, have an electronic version, and there aren't always copyright clearances to have an electronic version of them. But in terms of a collection, we have one of the largest now in the country.
And the reason I bring it is that I was reading recently that Amazon, you can get access to over 300,000 books.
Right.
And so, and again, I know it's a different technology. They have to get the access, but it's all economics driven, because people are buying those books even at a reduced cost. But we're gonna ask to see how we can expand that, and if whether there's funds that can help expand it in the sense of looking at ways that we're taking full advantage of it. The other thing, and we've made a motion in Budget and Finance Committee recently, and Mr. Smith supported it, is that you're one of the few departments that do not have a general fund attachment. You're basically funded by the allocation of property taxes. And what we're going to try to do in the next budget year is to allow that funding to come in and not find ways to take the money from you, because you know, I think you and Rec and Parks are the only two departments that we charge for your utilities, and there's no, it's not a science project to figure out why, but the issue is that we're going to try to figure out, if you're not on the general fund, how you then can manage your budget within your resources, and see how also, in talking with the CAO, how we might not inhibit you from being operationally functional by putting you on these semi-freezes and things if you're within your allocated budget. So those are things that we're going to be trying to do in next budget year, and we need some support from the department and your commissioners as you go through next year's budget to be on the same page that we're trying to get a couple of departments that basically get a charter allocation, is to allow them to manage within that charter allocation. So,
That would be great.
okay. It'll be a tough pull, but we're going to
Right.
keep at it.
Any questions? Okay, well, I guess our motion is to note and file the controller's audit, unless anyone has other
You think
additional
we
motions.
had a similar motion from this committee, that during the budgetary process that libraries be dealt with differently, just as in support the Budget Finance Committee.
If we think it would be helpful, I don't see why not.
Well,
So,
I don't have the exact wording, but basically it's just that the library department be allowed to function within their charter allocation of funds, and that that they're not imposed upon by city personnel rules, and also imposed upon as relates to costs that are not associated with their operation, as long as they're within, that they're not draining the general fund. So if we can,
Can't excuse them from city personnel rules.
no, I mean in the sense of
Additional
the issues of freezes and
freezes and layoffs.
layoffs and things like that. But not civil service rules,
Right.
but the issue
Right.
of operational impositions that we make.
I'll second that, and I will assume that will pass without objection. And if we could have that, I guess, come back to audits with
Yeah,
the wording of that. And
We just added it that we support the Budget and Finance has made a
I don't know if
prior.
we can actually do that and send that here. Mr. Parks, it's been pointed out, we may have a problem even sending that forward.
Oh, that's right, because we're all on the
Trying to
same
have a
thing.
problem here.
Oh, I didn't-
So,
yeah. I didn't think about that,
the library department should recommend
yeah.
to the Budget and Finance Committee that.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Ditto.
that's an oddity, but I guess since we're all on that committee, that's a fair point.
Budget and Finance Committee, we have a quorum.
Hey, I might need a little more notice than that.
Yeah, well, rules.
Well, I guess for the moment, we'll just note and file the controller's audit then, if there's no objection. And
That was 5. Item 5.
Oh, and also without objection, we will approve the motion by council members Weezer and Labange relating to the library department report.
Could I just make a comment on that?
Certainly.
On the motion, it also directs that the library report on how the department's budget reductions and proposed branch closures will affect its ability to implement the recommendations identified in the audits. Definitely a significant decrease in our budget would affect the implementation of these recommendations. Obviously, a decrease in our book budget would reduce the amount of books available to the public and would increase the waiting time for the books, which they've highlighted. Another thing that would impact the library's operation is the passage of the ERIP, the Employee Retirement Incentive Program, where our department has, out of 1,100 positions, we have 300 people eligible to retire. And, we're estimating 100 people might go, and plus the 100 vacancies, so that would be 200 people, and that would equate to a 20% loss of staff. Additionally, in the ERIP ordinance, it talks about the backfill of only 6%. 6% is 144 positions. We will be competing with the other 39 departments to fulfill, to backfill positions. So we're competing with custodians, security officers, port pilots, sanitation workers, all of these. I mean, it's feasible to think that we might not be able to hire a new employee for 15 years. So that's a huge impact to our department. I just wanted to let you know that.
I'm not so sure your calculations are right.
I hope they're not. But
It'd be 6% of those that leave under ERIP. So if you think
Okay.
maybe 100 would, it be 6.
okay.
And secondly, there are some limitations on the number of people that can leave any one department. So we're not going to see like one department decimated and another department not be touched. So if there's a balancing act that's going to go on, that's going to escalate as the year goes along, and if some departments have too many, they're going to stop ERIP in that department until other departments start seeing them too. So it's a very complicated, a lot of moving parts, but I think your numbers are probably a little exaggerated, and it's because you don't know how that's going to work out. Nor do we fully yet, but
Because I asked the CAO then, they agreed with me that they thought my assessment was correct.
the numbers,
They thought that it's
Couple
possible we wouldn't be backfilling a whole lot of positions when we're
Well,
competing with the other.
the ERIP only applies to those that would leave under ERIP.
Right.
And if there's 100 you think would leave, that would be 6.
Okay,
Okay, 6%.
right.
That
So-
could be filled back.
Right.
The others would remain, and it would escalate over time.
Okay.
So you get some of them back over time, and there's a whole scale. It's very complicated, but
I mean, on an average non-recession year, we attrit like 40 people. We have in our makeup 450 librarians, 550 clerk typists or clerks. So, 40 people every year, and then if we only can hire 1, 2, or 6, it's a dramatic impact to our department.
Let me ask, on that motion, wouldn't most of the stuff they're asking be part of your response to the operational plans that are
Sure.
going to,
You're right, it would
CAO.
also,
so,
so we'll
So-
certainly bring that up.
I'm just wondering, are we asking for another report on that motion? Is that what we're asking for, another, because I'm just saying they're gonna be answering almost all of these questions on their operational plans to the CAO as all of these negotiations come to pass.
It's recommended that you can note and file this motion in as much as the issues have already been addressed.
Okay.
And the motion also went through Arts Parks Committee as well. So note and file along with audits would be recommended.
Okay, that'll be done.
Mr. Chair, just for the record, items 3 and items 4 will be note and filed, and item number 5 as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if we could do item number 1 and 2 together.
Item number 1 is a Department of Recreation and Parks report in response to the motion of Council Members Huizar and Rosendahl relative to the status of the Queen V collection in each council district, the specific requirements regarding the collection and use of the fees, and how the department tracks the fees, and how the department's future plans to improve the tracking and expenditure system. This item was continued from August 5th, 2009. And on October 30, 2007, the Arts, Parks, Health, and Aging Committee approved the motion. And item number 2 is a City Controller's report relative to the audit of Queen Bee collections and uses and departmental responses. And this item was continued from August 5, 2009.
Okay, I guess we should start with the City Controller's report, if we have someone prepared to speak to that.
Rick Degucci, Controller's Office. We issued our audit report in February 2008. At the time of our audit, the department had a balance of $129 million in the Quimby Fund. The audit had 4 objectives: validate collection figures and RAPS management reports, verify that Quimby funds were used for eligible expenditures, determine whether fees were properly calculated and collected, and also evaluate oversight and internal controls over the Quimby program. In terms of our results, we did not find any inappropriate expenditures. The issues that we had were, first of all, fees were calculated incorrectly, resulting in overcharges of $4.5 million since 2004. The overcharges resulted from various calculation errors. Every year there's a new fee that's supposed to be calculated based on a change in a real estate index that's published by the Real Estate Research Council of Southern California. For example, in one case, the index changed from 233 to 248, which is 15 points. The Department of Planning increased the fee by 15% instead of 6.4%. They just took the difference between the 233 and 248. So they made that error in 2 different years, and that resulted in the $4.5 million of overcollections. The other issues were that the department did not have a comprehensive plan in place for spending the money. Again, there was $130 million in the fund. It had accumulated significantly over the years. For example, in 2001, 2002, the balance was about $20 million. So it went from $20 million to $130 million over a period of about 6 years. And lastly, some of the Quimby codes have not been updated for several years. These codes were adopted in the 70s and 80s, and some of them inhibited the department to spend the money. For example, one requirement was that the money can only be spent on projects within 2 miles from where the fees were collected. And that was one of the reasons why the money had not been spent. We periodically monitor the status of the department's recommendations. In terms of planning, there were 4 recommendations for their department. They had implemented 3. One's still in progress. The one in progress has to do with, again, looking at some of the codes. They hadn't corrected all the calculation errors, so they went back to pretty much day one and recalculated what the fee was supposed to be. In terms of recreation and parks, they had 5 recommendations related to their department. They have reported 3 as implemented and 2 partially implemented. We've accepted 2 so far as implemented. We're in the process of doing another evaluation. We should be completed with that probably within the next 2 weeks.
Thank you. Now, if we could get a presentation from Rec and Parks.
Daryl Ford from the Department of Recreation and Parks.
Jim Newsom, Department of Rec and Parks.
Councilmember, just to give a brief update on where we're at following up on the controller's report about the Quimby system and Quimby calculations. So our department has implemented what we call a Quimby tracking system. It has been up and running for about 1.5 years now. It's a system that is GIS-based. It's a web-based system. It enables us to track all Quimby collections and expenditures. We can note when collections came in, when expenditures were made, to what projects, to what reports. Essentially, the Quimby tracking system gives us the ability to follow every dollar. So every dollar that comes into the system, we can see where it goes and to which projects and at what time. So our Quimby tracking system really gives us the ability to manage these funds, gives us the ability to utilize these funds appropriately, and it really has been a magnificent step from where we were tracking our systems before. Discuss a little bit about the comprehensive planning issues. As you may be aware, the department has a citywide community needs assessment project, which is going to our Board of Recreation and Park Commissioners, I believe, this Friday. The final report is going for their adoption. It's the needs assessment final report will be one of the planning tools that the department will use to help allocate its Quimby fees for future projects. Like any other planning tool, it's just one element that we'll use. It, of course, includes stakeholder outreach and community input, staff input, but it really will give us another valuable tool in our arsenal to really drill down and do the right projects in the right places. So it'll give us, combined with the Quimby tracking system, will really give us the tools we need in order to use Quimby effectively in the communities that are most need.
Now, I understand that we spent over $500,000 on this needs assessment study, but that there's another $600,000 that we need to complete a master plan using that information. Is that correct?
Excuse us, Mike Shaw with the Department of Recreation and Parks. We've done an estimate. It's a very preliminary estimate on what we thought it would need to actually prepare a very formal strategic plan, which would be the master plan, of which the needs assessment would be part of that. And we've estimated at about $1.2 million. With similar situation as was described with the library department we're in. I mean, the Quimby tracking system, we basically self-funded when we did have funds to do that. We essentially brought technology to supplement insufficient staffing. So we're able to do, the work with the Quimby tracking system. We're able to do the work of probably 3 or 4 people with one person. That was an investment that we did probably 2.5. We started about 2.5 years ago. However, the strategic plan, master plan, is until such time we can identify funds, we really have placed that on hold until such time. And right now we're dealing with the budget issues and staffing and all the issues that go along with that. And most of the funding that comes into the department, as is the library, is under real estate, is related to the real estate market as well. So we're in a very much similar situation.
Now, is this something that has to be done on a consultant basis, or can we do it with folks in-house?
No, we would definitely hire a consultant. We would use in-house staff, but we would definitely need, for the sheer size of our city, and with the staffing levels that we have, we would definitely need to hire a consultant to run the majority of it, and that would be our plan.
Are there any other potential resources available? I guess Quimby funds can't be used for this kind of management
Correct.
activity, as I understand it. Are there other funds that we could look at to do that, so we don't hold up the expenditure of tens of millions of dollars of these funds?
Well, we're not holding up the expenditure of the funds. I mean, we are using the needs assessment. I mean, we gained a lot of valuable community input during that document, and by no means are we holding up the expenditure of funds. And I believe Darryl in his report will give you some idea of the allocations that we've done, but we've come, multiple millions of dollars towards moving projects along, based on still the traditional community input process outside of but we use the needs assessment as validation and actually steer us towards communities where we heard from them earlier that things were needed, and we need to match that where the development was, because all the needs don't necessarily match where the Quimby money is as well. So we always have to make that marriage, and we're going to continue to do that. There is some hope with possibly some strategic master planning money, and that might be through Proposition 84. They haven't released, there's many chapters in Proposition 84, which is a statewide bond measure that includes, the most recent chapter that's out right now is in roughly $380 million for basically new parks. But there is other chapters that, as the state releases those funds, we'll watch to see if we couldn't get that to use for planning purposes. And the master plan is one of those items that we will be keeping an eye on.
And I know one of the things that's been an impediment has been the regulation that you have to expend the money within 2 miles of the development. I know at various points we looked at how one could change that. Are we making any progress towards that direction? Is that something that's held up by this master planning process, or is there some way we can move forward on it?
No, it's not directly related with the master planning process. It does, however, involve the city planning department, and they would actually be the ones that would change the code. We've had a series of meetings with them, but I believe there are members from city planning here that may be able to speak, closer to the issue, because they would actually have to drive the process. we provide support, as much supporting information as we can. But we have not actually made any progress towards amending any of the codes, although there's been many recommendations made.
And I'll ask someone from planning in a second to answer that question. I'm somewhat new to this, so this may be a more ignorant question, but are the funds expended within the council district that a development takes place, or does it ever cross boundaries? How does that work?
The law doesn't differentiate between council districts. It only differentiates, the law is written basically from the point of collection. Now, for certain types of facilities or parks, that radius either changes from 1 mile to 2 miles, and sometimes that radius does extend into other council districts. As a matter of unwritten policy, we've kept the funds as much as possible within. In fact, I don't know of any case where we've taken money outside of a council district. But there are cases even today that different council districts are looking at, money that kind of crosses district lines and how money might be coupled together. So it's the law doesn't prevent it. It's just basically an unwritten rule that we've tried to follow.
Why don't we ask someone who might be here from planning to answer that other question for a moment, if we could.
Good afternoon. Tom Rothman from the Planning Department.
And the question was whether we've made any progress on changing the 2 mile radius requirement, and where we stand with that.
We have made considerable progress. We held a few workshops. We worked closely with the Parks Department. A number of issues, such as the radius, was addressed. Unfortunately, we did pull our staff person who was assigned to that project off temporarily for working on the sign ordinances and a couple other ordinances that took priority. We are back on track. That person has been reassigned to working on the Quimby ordinance, and we plan to bring it to our City Planning Commission, a draft, this winter sometime. So we have geared back up. We're going to start meeting with the Parks Department again and make sure that our recommendations are on board with what their thoughts are.
And do we have any sense of what the radius would be if we changed that number?
We've, from the one workshop we had with the public and the developers, was can we increase it from 2 miles to 5 miles to 3 miles? It was in that. It never went larger than 5 miles. I think when it comes down to it, it's going to be a decision for our commission to decide what the actual number will be. But I think we will recommend that it gets enlarged. I just don't know. At some point, there are lots of constituencies that are not in favor of us increasing it too much.
Is that guided by state law as to the boundaries or the width?
The radius of the Quimby? I'm not sure. Mike could speak to that.
No, the state law says within a reasonable distance. It's the city's, basically it's the city's general plan that defines the 1 mile for neighborhood parks and 2 miles for community parks. And I would add that during the community needs assessment that Darrell spoke of, we did survey, in the survey that we did mail out as part of the process, the respondents to the survey, 63% of would travel at least 1 mile to a neighborhood park, and 38% would travel at least 2 miles to a neighborhood park. That's pretty consistent with what our general plan says. And then regarding community parks, which is a larger type park that might have would have amenities and size that a neighborhood park would not have, 71% said they would travel at least the 2 miles, and 37% would travel more than 3 miles. So I don't think we're looking, even if we use this as, I think more work needs to be done and outreach for this survey. I'm not suggesting that this covers the entire city, but although it is a statistically valid survey, basically I think we're in the range. We might be able to increase it some, but I do agree with Tom that I think there's a lot of communities that have a lot of issues with money moving outside of their community. Using downtown as a perfect example where the development is so strong in such a small area that moving it too far out of that boundary would not serve the community in which it was the money was gained.
Right, but also there's a question of practicality where the right site, the right amount of money. If those things aren't married, just trying to keep within the 2 miles might not be flexible. I think our city folks have the sense to try and put the money as close to where the development is, but where it's not practical, I think it makes a lot of sense to add additional flexibility so something really can be done. Right. I know I can think of at least one situation where we're recommending some Quimby expenditures in the park where it almost seems like we're doing it because we have the money and it's the right area and it's a reachable park, but what's being done might not be nearly as valuable as something you could do with that money 3 miles away. It just doesn't quite meet the requirements.
And you precisely hit on, one of the, from a staff's perspective, one of the biggest challenges with the program. It's not driven by needs. This money is, it's not, well, it's driven by needs of that particular development. But for example, apartment dwellings, any new apartment does not pay Quimby fees, and that's an obvious increase in density in a certain area, but they don't pay the fees. But it's again, part of the challenge with Quimby has been and will continue to be that there's very little money available in South LA, next to nothing. Mm-hmm. There's not anything our department can do about that. By law, we're required, we're not able to meet it. So although we know there's tremendous needs there, Quimby cannot be used as an answer. And so that's been part of the problem as we've developed and moved projects along, is making those right marriages where there's needs and there's also money. And it's very challenging, very, very challenging.
So hopefully increasing that mileage would enable us to do a little more of that.
Well, it definitely would, yeah.
Other questions?
What are the things that we're recommending to change in the ordinance? You heard about the distance. Is there other features?
Well, I recall a couple. Like for one, we were looking at apartments as being calculated a fee for paying a Quimby. There's no real difference between a brand new apartment complex going up in an area than a condominium complex.
Was that a policy decision by the city? I mean, we're not restrained from doing it. Is it just something when we created our process, we just chose not to include them?
I believe the Quimby, the state guidelines require a Quimby when there's a subdivision act, and which is required of all new condominiums and subdivisions. We do apply a similar fee when a zone change is accompanied with an apartment building, but we do not require any Quimby fees when it's just a by right apartment building. So we are looking to, that is a city policy, and we are looking to possibly change that, because it doesn't, as Mike just said, it doesn't really make much sense to make a distinction between an apartment dweller and a condo dweller.
But that's a city policy.
That is a city policy.
State law.
Right.
Now, is there any deferral as it relates to housing, such as low-cost housing or something of that nature? Is that restricted? Is that a city policy?
That is a city policy also, and we've been discussing that also in our workshops. Should we include affordable housing? Should they pay Quimby or not? And that's something else.
What we just found out, and we were shocked, is that student housing produces Quimby. We just realized that when they built a facility on Jefferson, and so up until that time, we thought it was not. So that's all of those recommendations have been sent to planning, and you're going through them now.
Right. We're starting to go through to really pick up our study on this.
Okay. And again, it appears, and I won't hold you to this, but it appears that most everything you're looking at are city policies. It doesn't require us to go and try to get the state law changed.
Correct. And we're also looking at possibly, instead of requiring a fee, having a developer set aside open space on site for public access and a similar item, so that it's not always just them giving the city a dollar amount. That we understand that for the Parks Department, it's very difficult to acquire land, so we're looking at other ways for dedication.
Okay. Also, I was going to ask you, does planning ever look at on the front end that, because some places have a very densely populated development, and several of them are going on at one time. Is there any effort to look prior to the construction, whether there's even feasible to create green space within a 2-mile radius? I mean, because some of it just looks like it's stacked on top of each other, and there's only so many 2 miles you can go. I mean, so is that a consideration on the front end?
That's a good point. I think Mike talked about it. It's very difficult. We have areas of the city that have intense development, and there really is not much land left. We are trying to, places such as that would be prime areas for land dedication within the project. That might be something that the developer would be able to consider
That
as
would be
opposed to
public land.
publicly accessible.
Okay.
I just want to add to that as as a matter for the record, the Recreation and Parks would always prefer that a developer provide the open space as part of their development, not pay the city the funding. They can do a lot more with the funds under their own purview than they can when it gets into the city's process and bureaucracy. So we would always prefer them to develop the park, and then we figure out how to credit them their Quimby funds so that the park is there when the development is done and serving the reason, and it's there serving the very reason why the Quimby Act was actually was put into law. Secondly, one of the recommendations that we've made to planning is that as we move forward, it's absolutely critical that Recreation and Parks is developed at the very, very beginning stages of these developments so that we can make recommendations to the city planning department before the developer gets too far down on his entitlements, because it's too difficult for them to turn around by the time we do get involved. And it's very possible that as we move forward in the law, that we can figure out ways in the new code to force developers in an area that's under heavy development to work together to create an open space. It doesn't have to be, for us, it can be, a group of developers that acquire a land off-site. It doesn't need to be exactly on their property. There's lots of creative ways that we can do. It's just getting involved at the front end. And that's what we're striving to, to do as we move forward.
What's been the shortfall? It's just you brought in after the entitlements, or
usually
after it's moved forward?
we're not in the process. I mean, a lot of that has changed since our over the last couple of years, but we were not brought in at the very beginning of the process. Whereas, even now there's some challenges to that, but it's critical that we are. Otherwise, the city planning has no recourse other than to accept the in lieu fee, when in fact our department does not want their money. We want them to build a park.
One thing I was wondering too is that when you mentioned you prefer them to build on the site that they're constructing, and one of the things I would hope that if we get to that point, that we do it maybe a little differently than what we do with art fees, because sometimes the art fees is somebody just decided to build a prettier fence, as opposed to creating anything that most of us would say is part of art. They have decided that they just bought a more expensive fence and has some designs in it,
right,
and that's our art. But I would hope that we have more of an ability to guide that.
Well, we currently, under current laws, we do already have that ability, and there's acreage requirements that are available for the city to enforce if we so choose to do so.
Any other questions?
Yeah, one last thing on the 2 mile. I recall I did a motion on it years ago, and I thought it was I think it was in our city policy, wasn't it, to request the legislature to change that, and no one ever did? You recall that?
I'm not sure I recall that motion, but that's exactly what we're working on now. That's what our workshops are about.
If I could have Eric, if you could have check it out. I thought it was in our city policy request years ago, and no one ever did it. And I bring it up because maybe now's the time with someone like Karen Bass, who represents some of the impacted areas of the city where you just can't find park space, that somebody like Karen could carry it or get someone to carry it for us to just loosen up that restriction. It's really necessary. I have the second largest park in the city, O'Melveny Park, which is on the city's border, and I had development right next to it on the city's border, so I can use it in 2 miles, but half the 2 miles is outside the city limits, so what can you do with it? The other half was O'Melveny Park, what can you do with it? We had a lot of money you couldn't spend, and there are places in my district, I'm very fortunate to have probably the second or third largest number of parks in the city, and we're running out of things to do with that money, so I wouldn't mind having the ability to loan it to other districts or give it to other areas, at least some of it, to improve the other parts of the city. And I think flexibility is all we need, and so maybe you could talk to Karen or something about that and see if we
I would think that would be if we were able to get her to do it, she'd be the ideal person.
Perfect.
Having the speaker carry a bill like that, it would
and
probably just
representing
fly through.
various areas of the city of LA, too.
Did you say earlier that you didn't think that was part of the state law? Because that's what I wrote down.
I believe that there is some flexibility within the city's law that we could change it on our own. I don't know necessarily if we have to go to the state legislature for a change in
Earlier
that.
you said it was.
No, I said we were working on a city ordinance, and I think Mike.
The state law requires only to if I'm quoted it correctly, the law states that it needs to be spent within a reasonable distance. It doesn't give a.
And so we define reasonable.
We
2
defined,
miles.
the city defined the distance by its enacting, own law, which is.
And how soon do you think those recommendations you're working on are going to get through the system?
I think we will bring a draft ordinance to our city planning commission this winter, if not by the end of the fall,
And that's like what
Like-
month?
like December, January. But as I was saying earlier, I think, and Mike alluded to also, it's the expansion. There's a balancing act
Yes.
between the communities that are very opposed to us expanding that radius. So we have to take that all into consideration.
And,
So-
I mean, those are the fights we have to have, but sometimes, I have a fund that's available from the Sunshine Canyon dump, which is supposed to be sent within 5 miles of the dump.
Right.
I went to the community and said, I have a desperate need to buy a park in Chatsworth. It's a piece of property we want to preserve. If we don't preserve it, we'll lose it forever. Can we borrow that money? And they said, sure, that's a good thing to do. So I think we have the ability to talk to the community sometimes, and they'll go along and understand. Now I got to find out how to repay it, but that's a different problem.
Yeah, but I think the community probably needs to realize that we created the barrier of the 2 miles.
Yeah.
It wasn't mandated. It's the city created the policy, and now that you've outlived the policy or grown beyond it, it may be time to adjust it.
Now, the previous city controller's office asked that we look at the possibility of switching to a different but equivalent fee program to Quimby. Are we still thinking that there's some value to that, or would the change from a 2 mile to a broader radius solve any of the inflexibility problems with the Quimby process?
You want to answer that, or?
I can only say that, I've heard discussions with city planning on possible developing some sort of development fee or something in lieu of Quimby or something similar to Quimby, but I don't know. City planning would have to answer that. I don't know, how that is, how that would address the park issue, but, it would address basically all city infrastructure issues as it pertains to that.
Do we have anyone here that's familiar with those discussions? I don't know if you're familiar.
We've had a lot. I'm not. Are you referring to us expanding what we're already charging in fees, similar to Quimby, or a different program altogether?
A
that
different
that can
program
be
that
applied to
would-
things other than just capital improvements that can go towards
Right,
maintenance.
that would have more flexibility, et cetera.
We've had conversations about it, but at the moment we have no recommendations about how that would work. Hold on.
Again, Darrell Ford, just, I think one of the fees you're maybe discussing is the Mitigation Fee Act. The Mitigation Fee Act is a different fee than what Quimby fees are, and maybe it's possibly a tool we could look at. Another course, and that's for planning to review. And then just speaking about other things, there are other tools that are available, benefit assessment districts. There are a lot of other things that could be done to help fund acquisition and development, and even with certain types of districts, maintenance. So the state does give us a lot of tools to work with. We don't necessarily have to stick with Quimby. It's good. We can make it work better, but there are other tools out there we can also use.
So are we in the process of analyzing that and coming back, or has it just had some passing discussions, and do we need to give some stronger direction on giving that some serious analysis? Where do we stand with it?
As I said, it's part of our discussions in those workshops, and I'll make sure that it gets moved to the top of our next agenda, how we can come up with more creative ways to increase park funding. But at the moment, it's all just conversation at the moment.
What's a reasonable time to ask you to come back with an opinion so we can we can shoot for a concrete date to do that.
45 days.
Why don't we give it 60 days to make sure we've given you enough time in this constrained period, and ask you to come back with an analysis of whether we should look at moving towards different choices in terms of funding.
So I'm clear, when you come back, what is it you're going to analyze? Is it the mitigation funds that he was just talking about, or are there other things that are in the mix?
I think it'll be some things of what Mr. Ford just suggested, and maybe we'll have another workshop. We'll pass the idea around, see how we can get more creative.
All the things that are
Right.
available.
I'll bring you a list of all the things we're discussing in our workshops. You know, we are talking about expanding the Quimby to other things, and maybe how we can modify to have another parks fund.
Thank you.
Okay, and I had just one other question. The requirement to allocate funds to projects within 5 years, we kind of slipped there for a while,
Right.
had a large surplus. Have we now got that caught up, and have we allocated all the Quimby funds to projects within the time frame?
I know we've been hard at work doing that. I will check, and I'll get back to you in the 60 days also on how we've come so far.
Okay.
But I think everything has last I checked, was working very well with the refunds.
Is there any kind of requirement, or should there be a requirement for recreation and parks to talk to developers before they get their entitlements?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yes, we've talked to parks. I want to make sure that in the future, like Mike mentioned, it is a problem because everything gets entitled. They pay their Quimby, but Parks Department is not involved at the beginning. We would like to bring them into it. We're talking as part of the reorganization of the 12 to 2, having parks come in early on in the process, or just really bringing them in, and also expanding our early notification so that even if things that can't even slip through the cracks, so that parks will be apprised of all of our new projects coming in. So if they see an apartment building with 49 units, they can see that and notify us if we've missed something. So we are definitely changing the way we operate.
So that's in the process already,
definitely in
so
the
it's not
process.
something we need to give direction on.
That'll be just an in-house policy.
Let me ask one other question. With this ongoing community plans
Mhm.
going through, did they address at all park space or green space as part of the community plans? Because if we stay on schedule, we're updating, I think, 10 a year. And so how does parks get addressed in the community plan?
Yeah, there is a parks. Each of our community planners, as they're updating the community plan, there's a section of parks and recreation. They talk about where the need for parks and where available places would be.
So they actually identify in the plan?
They identify places in the plans.
Do they also, in addition to that, do any assessment as to what would be a reasonable amount of park space for this available community plan? I mean, is there any assessment that this community plan should have 3 acres of park space? Is any judgment like that?
That I really can't speak to. I know that almost all of our community plans are don't have enough as it is. So I think that.
Do we make any assessment as to size and acreage to say, ideally, this amount of this area covered by the community plan should have X number of acres, even though it may not be available? Do we make any judgments like that?
Well, I think that, the Parks Department, I believe, there are lots of numbers that are tossed around a lot, that I know that there should be X amount of park space per person or per unit. So I think that's just a number that we look at citywide.
Okay, that's just computed as to the existing units of housing that are currently available. You then make a judgment as to how much park space should be a part of that plan.
Yeah, Darrell could definitely answer this. Yeah.
Just to talk a little bit about, this kind of goes back to what we did as a part of our needs assessment process, and what we will do as a part of the strategic plan process is when we were doing that survey work and we were doing those outreach groups, we were looking at things on the community plan level, really on the area planning commission level, so that we could have this type of data, so that we could see there might be areas of the city where you'll have a variance in park standards, that maybe one area needs more open space or one area needs more athletic fields or whatever it might be. So as a part of that needs assessment process, we really wanted to look at those types of things, so that when we do the strategic plan, we might set up a system where different parts of the city have different acreage requirements or different facility requirements. It's completely feasible. So there's
when you talk about needs assessment, does it find its way into the community plan?
I think we'll have to continue to have those conversations with planning. Of course, hopefully our board will adopt the needs assessment on Friday, and we'll move forward with the strategic plan process. But as a part of those new community plans, as they are being done, we give planning department that input. We participate in the formation of those community plans. We sit in those groups. So we're having that dialogue and those conversations. It's something we're going to continue.
It's mandatory that it's connected, because you will have a great needs assessment, but if they finish the community plans and they're not connected, you'll still have a great needs assessment that nobody will know about. So there's got to be some way that we ensure that it's part of the community plan.
Yep, our community planners, I know on some of the community plans have been in contact with parks. I'm not positive about every one of our community plans, but certainly in Boyle Heights and in Central City, we've worked closely with parks and with other departments. We incorporate the Los Angeles River Revitalization Master Plan into all of the relevant community plans, which has a very grand scheme for a 32-mile park in the city. That's all incorporated into all the community plans that get done. And we'll work very closely with parks, as we always do.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I guess we need a couple motions. I guess we would logically instruct Rec and Parks to transmit the needs assessment to the council and the full council, and transmit the periodic Quimby fee reports to the full council. And I guess also continue the item for 60 days until the question of the alternative process to the Quimby process comes back to us for review.
Councilmember, just real quick, we do provide the assessment, the Quimby quarterly report on our website. Is that a sufficient method? Because we make that available to the general public for anybody to download. All the information, of course, is public, and we do provide it on the website at right now, this time.
I'd still submit it directly to the council offices. So if there's no objections, Councilmember Parks will second that, and we'll move that forward. Oh, you know something? My apologies. I missed one speaker, I think, on the item we just discussed. So before we formalize that motion, if we could have Dr. Clyde Williams speak. I didn't notice that wasn't the general item. Looks like it's on council file, item number 1.
Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA. Always a problem with the Quimby funds. $100 million or more not spent. Why? Perhaps it's because $100 million of capital requires about $10 million to operate and maintain. And maybe Parks and Rec can't get that money to operate and maintain the investment. My concern is that. There's also a concern as to where are these deposits right now? How much interest are they raising? How much of that interest money goes back into the fund, the Quimby fund? Or is it being used for other purposes? The gas tax used to be done that way. So there's a lot of concern regarding the audit trail of not only the assignment, but also the money. Always follow the money. They also appear to be reluctant to spend the money because if they spend it within 2 miles of a development area, they're already talking about removing, say, 10 acres of downtown area for parks. What does that do to your revenue generation? The whole thing doesn't seem to be well thought out as to long-term, as to who needs it and where they are, and also the cash flow. Follow the money. If you are restricted to take out, say, parks for the Cornfields Arroyo Seco master plan that's being, our specific plan that's being developed, well, that's going to take out a large area within 2 miles of the Lincoln Heights and other areas which may be providing revenue which will no longer be available. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, if we, before we make our motion final, if I could take 1 minute and ask that question, what do we do with, how do we manage the money before we spend it? What do we do with the interest? Who manages it? And does the interest go into the Quimby funds or does it go elsewhere?
It stays within the Quimby accounts. It's not used for any other purpose.
And who manages it?
It's managed between our finance division and Rec and Parks. 'Cause we accept the city planning calculates the fee, we collect the fee, and then we're responsible for managing, even the interest that comes into the department.
So is it the same folks that manage other city money as it sits in funds before it's expended?
Yeah, we all work on many different funding sources, so yes. It's...
The city treasurer's office, I
Yeah.
presume.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And now I will assume again that we pass this item without objection. And if there's nothing else,
Mr. Chair, just for clarity, both items will be continued for 60 days with a report back from,
yes.
from the planning.
And
Thank you, and we are adjourned.